Just like the variety of plants and life on our native grasslands, South Dakota is filled with diverse partners playing a role in supporting those grasslands. Each episode, Partners on the Prairie will introduce you to those impacting South Dakota's grasslands. I'm your host, Laura Kaler, Director of the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative, a collaborative network of diverse partners who support grasslands as a means of retaining prairie ecosystems, both native and restored, while sustaining rural economies and healthy communities. With me today is Tanse Herrmann, State Grazing Land Soil Health Specialist for South Dakota NRCS. In his role, Tanse is able to combine his passion for the relationship between healthy grasslands and healthy soil through education and support to producers. Located out of the Rapid City office, Tanse provides outreach across the state and is here today to give an overview of what NRCS offers, as well as some of his specific work. Thanks so much for joining us, Tanse. I'm glad you're able to get on and share about NRCS today. As an agency funded by the USDA, can you describe some of the key audiences and goals of NRCS in South Dakota?
Absolutely. You know, the NRCS has its roots clear back into the 1930s when Great Plains of the U.S. were suffering from massive soil erosion due to tillage and conversion of grasslands into cropland as part of the Homestead Act. And now, of course, our name has changed. Rather than simply dealing with soil erosion, we consider other resource concerns such as water quality and quantity, air quality, plants and animals productivity, as well as just overall health and diversity, as well as energy needs. We really kind of cover the gamut, if you will, of what types of things the landowners and agricultural producers struggle with, whether those are directly tied to financial objectives or not. We simply recognize that our roots in soil function and productivity on the landscape is really, really important. So while our mission has broadened in going on 100 years here, we're still directly tied to the soil, and science continues to learn more and more about the organisms that live in the soil. Now, just this summer, I was at a conference or workshop in the field with Dr. Chris Nichols. She said when she entered college, the professor told them as a freshman, intro to soil microbiology, that science knew roughly 10% of the organisms that lived in the soil. She was excited about that. Well, after attending college, I think she said for 9 or 10 years, something like that, and leaving with her PhD, the statement was made that we know 0.1% of the organisms that live in the soil. Now, a person could take that the wrong way and indicate that humans have gotten more stupid when it comes to soil microbiology. But the fact is that we continue to discover things more and more all the time, and the soil health realm is a very exciting place to be, and recognizing that soils are not a test tube. We can add inputs and make things change productivity, but a lot of times that well-intended approach leads to unintended consequences. For instance, taking fertilization, using commercial fertilizer on native grasslands, that free and available nitrogen often makes a window of opportunity for non-native plants to get a hold and begin to displace our more desirable, longer growing period, higher palatability, and oftentimes higher productivity native plants. Not to mention the unintended consequence of lower diversity, which often comes with that. But in my experience, when we're talking about diverse native rangelands, the best thing for the soil is simply to use appropriate livestock grazing, changing season of use on grazing occupations. If we're in a situation where maybe livestock aren't a part of that land management approach, I would offer up you should consider that. But B, how do we integrate disturbance into that grassland regime? Because over the centuries, our grasslands here in the Northern Great Plains experience disturbance from fire, from hail, from insects, from livestock. So we need to make sure that is a regular part of our management decision making.
And something that I've become aware of over the past few years is that NRCS isn't just focused on your typical scaled farmer or rancher, but they also offer support and education and resources to those smaller scales who, like you were saying, might struggle to figure out how they're going to replicate disturbances on their soil on a 5-acre parcel.
That's absolutely true. In fact, only within the last few years, USDA has made a major push to reach an urban and small scale operator demographic. And we have one staff person in the state located in Sioux Falls. Rachel Lawton is her name, and she's available throughout the state for folks that believe that they might fit into that particular scenario. Certainly reach out to your local field office or me personally, and we can make those connections as well. But understand that USDA has recognized the need to not only service our traditional agricultural partners, farms and ranches like we would define them here in South Dakota, but also the backyard gardener, the person who's just trying to grow their own food or some of their own food. And you don't have to be a landowner to access NRCS services either. You can simply be an operator. If we're going to do any infrastructure improvements, then the landowner, of course, needs to be informed and offer up permission to do so. But we can continue that relationship largely with the operator on those pieces of land.
And there's an office in every county, more or less. So a producer can just start off, or a partner that wants to learn more can go into their local office and start there.
Yes, absolutely. You can check the local phone book. Many of us in our small towns, we know where that building is. The sign out front is always green and it says USDA Service Center. Or simply jump online to your favorite search engine and type in NRCS South Dakota. It will lead you to the right place.
It's a program that's known by their acronym and also has a lot of acronyms within itself. Could you break down some of the common programs like CRP and EQIP, talking about what that acronym is and then what is that program that it offers?
Yep. I know that it's not limited to the federal government, but we are famous for using acronyms. So let's start with, what does NRCS itself even mean? The USDA is the United States Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service. So our focus is all of those natural resources: soil, water, air, plants, animals, and then the energy considerations I mentioned earlier. We use acronyms like crazy for our program offerings. First of all, though, before I jump into those program offerings, I want folks to understand that NRCS is a taxpayer-funded agency in USDA, and our main charge is to provide technical assistance related to natural resources. So that's step number one, is make a personal contact with local staff and then move from there. They have access to technical specialists like myself that are located throughout the state, whether we're talking about planning grazing land rotations on native range, whether they're domesticated pastures or even the annual planted cropland. Now, program offerings, for instance, CRP grasslands. CRP is the Conservation Reserve Program. Historically, that has been a resting lands program, meaning that we would take some cropland that is probably highly erodible or has wetland acres associated with it or something. We're going to change something and address a resource concern by enrolling this parcel of land into this resting lands program. In the most recent farm bill, or maybe 2 farm bills ago, a working lands component of CRP came around. Rather than resting, CRP grasslands is meant to be continued to be used, following a grazing management plan that NRCS would develop that addresses appropriate stocking rates, changing that turn-in date, or what we call season of use, from one year to the next, appropriate record keeping, and ensuring that minimum recovery periods are met if a person was to try to utilize that pasture or pastures more than one time in the same growing season. So there's some sideboards, but really the flexibility still remains for that landowner or operator to manage their livestock and their land in most ways the way that they would choose to initially. I've found that the changes aren't that significant. The other thing is that if those requirements are difficult to meet with existing infrastructure, cost share or financial assistance is even available through the Conservation Reserve Program, for instance, on fencing as well as water developments, such as maybe a pipeline and a watering facility for livestock. Other ones that are flagship programs through NRCS would be the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. That one historically has largely helped with the infrastructure needs. Also, a financial assistance program that follows a conservation planning process with your local staff and identifying, here are our resource concerns, here are our chosen alternatives to address those resource concerns once all of this infrastructure is installed. And then we move into generally some management related thing, whether it's grazing management or if it's annually planted cropland, maybe a new crop rotation that might insert a small grain, for instance, if you're in row crop country. If you're further west and maybe aren't planting row crops, we may have integrated a cover crop, probably planted full season with the intention of grazing later on, either in the fall or even in the winter, once forage quality is declining, when we reach the late fall where dormancy starts to come into play. We also have the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. That one is more management focused. You still can install infrastructure practices like pipelines, like fences, like even livestock shelter structures, but really the focus is on a positive change in management. Usually a small or significant increase in management level may return dividends. So if I'm starting, for instance, in let's say a simple 4-pasture rotation with my livestock, CSP might be the incentive to maybe use temporary or permanent fencing with appropriate water development if needed, either permanent or temporary and mobile, to make that turn into 8 or 12 or 16 pastures with much shorter duration of livestock occupancy in each individual pasture or paddock, with the focus being that we enhance our recovery periods on those plants during the growing season, because we're impacting fewer acres at any given time during that growing season. So that's just an example. There are a wealth of programs available through NRCS or its partners to address the resource concerns that you have on your place. That can happen field by field or at the entire operation scale. Whatever your resources or objectives are, we'll walk with you through that.
Thanks for those explanations and examples.
Mm-hmm.
Your role with NRCS pulls together that relationship between the grasslands and soil health. For a lot of individuals in the state, they may have met you or seen you doing the Rainfall Simulator demonstration. Can you briefly describe what that is and how partners can connect with you to incorporate that demonstration into events that they might be doing?
Yes, the Rainfall Simulator is this fairly simple contraption that it's kind of expensive. That's why there maybe isn't more of them around. But really what we're doing is capturing in permeable trays soil from its native landscape, whether that's a pasture or cropland or what have you, and comparing side by side up to 5 different management scenarios. Usually we have a couple of grazing scenarios, one that's probably a cover crop or some growing annual forage, and then a soil health management system, typically no-till, that has soil coverage next to what we would consider conventionally tilled soil that does not have any plant residues on the soil surface, and then making it rain. Quite a rainstorm, in fact, usually to the tune of a couple inches in a 4 to 6 minute time frame. that might be the extreme example, but we use it in that manner so that folks can side by side understand and visualize what happens to water infiltration and runoff when that big rainstorm occurs. These healthy native rangeland systems, and even sometimes the healthy cropland, not sometimes, all the time, that healthy cropland scenario, they just keep taking water. It's like I could step out into my pasture and turn on the garden hose, and the water would never, over the course of a day, the water would never run off. It would just keep going in. It's like this giant sponge when we have healthy soils that are well aggregated, have appropriate bacteria to fungi ratios, have diversity. The principles of soil health we look at are to keep the soil covered and to minimize disturbance, or in the case of grazing lands, optimize disturbance, because grazing itself is a disturbance. Fire also, insects, hail, all those things are disturbances, and we need to adaptively manage our grasslands in order to respond appropriately if those things are occurring, so that we don't overutilize and cause ourselves to go backwards as far as soil function is concerned. So we've got cover, or armor, I like to call it, minimal or optimal disturbance. We've got to have living roots in the soil for as much of the year as possible. Healthy grasslands are the blueprint for these soil health principles. And when we have healthy, diverse native rangelands that are full of cool and warm season grasses, cool and warm season broadleaves, which we sometimes term as forbs. Oftentimes we have a shrub component, depending on the landscape position. That diversity in growth period, as well as the way those plants photosynthesize and capture and utilize the sunlight energy, as well as water nutrients from the soil. When it's happening throughout that growing season, these plants are pumping carbon, literally pumping carbon or sugar water into the soil, where the microscopic things that I myself and a large portion of the general public take for granted far too often. If we can't see them, it's as if they're not there, but boy, they are there, and they're doing us incredible services when it comes to the ability to rapidly infiltrate water, to hold on to that water, to increase our organic matter percentages, meaning that we can hold on to more for longer, and get us through those dry periods that we often experience in the Great Plains. With that living root, I've already kind of jumped into that diversity component. That's principle number 4, is that we have to recognize that there's more than one type of plant out there on the landscape. And when we end up in these monoculture type of situations, we're missing out on a whole lot of energy capture and opportunity to infiltrate water and provide grazing animals a more diverse diet that meets all of their nutritional needs throughout that growing season and even into the winter time. And finally, if they're not already present, livestock integration is the 5th and final principle. Depending on your listeners' experience with podcasts or soil health research, you may have even heard of a 6th a 6th principle that is context. Western South Dakota versus far eastern South Dakota have very different growing seasons, very different climates, and only separated by 200-300 miles. But context is different. The capacity of the soil where I live, not too far from Sturgis, is very different than that on the Coteau Hills on the opposite corner of the state, where the winter lasts longer, the rain comes more frequently in the summertime, and those soils were formed under glacial type of system, where who knows how long ago glaciers moved through, crunched up giant rocks into small rocks, which then became sand, silt, and clays that form that soil. Whereas over here in western South Dakota, much of it was formed under a historic marine environment, or it was an ocean at one time. And so our capacities as well as our plant communities are very different. So we have to recognize that not all soils are created equal. This soil health thing is big and wide and really takes a holistic approach. We look at the whole, that this is an ecosystem that is ever changing, and therefore we need to adapt. You know, yours and my generation, we're simply guests here. We're temporary guests. Hopefully we're making this landscape better for our children and grandchildren through our management decisions, while making a fruitful and profitable living, using the land that's been entrusted to us for the time.
So if a partner was having an event with an audience that would benefit from hearing about those 6 principles of soil health and viewing the Rainfall Simulator, are you able to travel around the state and bring that to them?
Yes. My position, even though I'm located in the Rapid City Field Support Office, is statewide. I also have a colleague, Kent Vlieger, who is in our Huron state office. We unofficially kind of split the state in half. If it's West River, I handle those events, and if it's East River, he handles those events. But it's not just Kent and I that run these rainfall simulators. We do have other staff that are willing and able to present that demonstration.
What are some other ways that partners can collaborate with NRCS?
I might consider a landowner or operator a partner, but then we have a whole host of non-government organizations that are most definitely partners. I just mentioned the Grassland Coalition is one of them. Soil Health Coalition, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, the Nature Conservancy, the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative. All of these things and organizations and individuals fit into what I would define as a partner. And we even have an assistant state conservationist whose focus is to assist and aid and support partner organizations, in part to reach those organizations' objectives, but also in part to amplify the NRCS objectives of helping people who are on the land make those wise decisions that make them more productive, more profitable, and bringing the next generation home, essentially, if the opportunity presents itself.
Any final messages or thoughts you want to share with that fellow partners that are listening?
The USDA-NRCS is available for everyone. I mentioned that before, but if you're a citizen of the United States of America, you can access our services. I invite you to reach out to your local field office. Courtesy of some recent legislation, NRCS has access to additional funding to help and provide for financial assistance through the programs that we mentioned before. Primarily, that's going to happen through EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. There are other programs also out there, but they aren't as statewide in focus. So depending on where you live, you may have some additional opportunities under a different acronym or a different program. But understand that what USDA defines as climate smart activities, those that typically will lead to higher soil carbon, soil organic matter, and those things that really speak to the principles of soil health, there are probably there is a funding opportunity through that. In addition to that, there's Inflation Reduction Act funding that will make NRCS an even bigger player as far as assistance financially throughout our state. And so I would encourage folks, if there's a project that you've been thinking about that might enhance your grazing management or enhance your operation in general, you might want to make a phone call or a personal visit to your local field office. Almost always we can work with someone on what we might just pass off. Well, it's always been that way, or no, that's too difficult. Well, maybe now's the time, because the funding opportunity to offset some of that risk as well as that out-of-pocket expense, I don't know if it'll ever be this good again as far as the financial assistance side of things through NRCS, as well as partner organizations, because we're funneling some of that funding through partner organizations as well. So if there's something that you're looking to do, then definitely visit with a local field office or reach out to Laura, who will connect you with me or someone else in our state's NRCS and partner organizations to really help you reach what your objectives are.
That's a great point, that now is the time for producers to, if they haven't already, go to the NRCS office, or for partners to encourage producers to go look into options with NRCS. Well, thank you, Tanse, for joining us today and sharing those messages. Thanks to our listeners for taking the time to learn more about your partner with NRCS. I hope this podcast has made you more aware of some of the resources and programs that they have. And we encourage you to visit the resource tab of our website, sdgrassinitiative.org, to find out more about NRCS and to find podcasts on other grassland partners.